uncovering this rich data from people doing these sessions that kind of says, well, no, this isn't one's off. This is reoccurring. This happens. People can overcome trauma. People can work through deep parts of themselves through this means or modality of breathing so that they can make a massive leap forward in their life.
So I am so very excited and honored to have Stuart Sandeman that is going to be joining us on Love at First Science today, who is not only a best-selling author, but dude, you have literally worked with everybody who's worth working with. I mean, everything from the BBC, you used to be a DJ producer. You've had such an amazing career so far. I can't wait to hear about more of your story.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, it feels sometimes like I've lived a few different lives already.
You
Kind of.
really have. You're so young and you've already done so much, but actually, you've had quite a deep story to kind of link you into this progression that you've kind of, this turn you've taken into the world of breath. So I'm going to hand over to you. Can you tell us your story, where it started and where it is right now?
Just been handed a glass of water there. Um, Perfect. So where to begin? Oh, okay, right. Yeah, my story's taken a few twists and turns, and I would have never imagined myself doing what I'm doing now, teaching people to breathe and helping people uncover the power within themselves using breath as a tool to evoke or amplify their human experience. Where my background, well, first of all, I pursued sport as a very high level. I was on a judo mat at 4 years old, and posters on my wall of Olympic athletes. I just wanted to be this ninja Olympic gold medalist, and took that to quite a high level. Was Scottish champion for many years. Left school to pursue it as a full-time practice, as a career, and sadly I got injured. I got injured quite badly in my back, slipped the disc in my back competing abroad, and took a different direction. I went off and worked and went off to university, studied maths, and ended up in finance. So very different, kind of jumping from the sports world and then arriving in a suit and tie in London, working in finance. And I worked over in Asia as well. So kind of sports into very corporate. And through that whole time, music's been another huge passion of mine. My parents said I could never sleep when I was younger unless I was listening to music. So it's always been something that's been a big thing for me, playing instruments, making music, running events as well when I was a little bit older, like sort of club night events, etc., and DJing as well. So that was a passion of mine that I was doing alongside my work, and I signed some record deals when I was over in Asia, and they were back in Europe and the UK, and I thought, well, maybe I'll take a bit of time off. Bit of time off my corporate work. I've been doing that job for long enough to maybe warrant a bit of time off, or long enough that I could step back in. It was kind of a calculated guess. But this was all spearheaded through, I always feel we have these pivot points in our life, where we have these moments in our life that allow us to wake up for a second. It's like, oh, okay. And for me, one of these was actually, when I was over living in Hong Kong, all my clients were in Japan, in Tokyo, and there was this big earthquake and big tsunami. The Fukushima disaster happened at the same time. I don't know if you remember that. It was all to do with radiation and leakage after this tsunami. So that happened, and I went over to Tokyo. My work sort of said, you should go and show face with your clients. And everyone was evacuating, and there was 2 massive earthquakes when I was there. And I'd never been in an earthquake before. So it felt very strange and very bizarre. And it was a real moment for me. It made me question what I was doing with myself. Like, and I asked myself a question. I said, if you got 100 years, if you're lucky, on this planet, would I be doing what I'm doing right now? And the answer is definitely not. So I came back to Hong Kong and pretty much handed my notice in. And I asked myself, well, what would I be doing if money wasn't an issue, and I could just do what I wanted to do. If somebody said, go and be something on this planet for 100 years, go and do something, I was like, it would be my music. And my music was bubbling up anyway. I'd already signed some record deals and I was getting gig requests for sort of festivals back in the UK. And I thought, you know what, let's just go for it. And I did. I kind of stepped out the corporate world and dived headfirst into the creative space, music, came back to Europe, and that all kicked off. And I started touring the world and playing festivals and clubs all across the world. So it's usually about now people say, well, breathing, where did that fit in? And that, I guess, was another pivot point. I after DJing for some time and having a great time and kind of feeling fully kind of in my passion, and without it, I mean, it did have its own challenges. The creative world does have challenges as well, and it was quite a crazy schedule and quite a lot of late nights. So I probably wasn't being the kindest to myself during that period in terms of what I was consuming. But my girlfriend at that time was diagnosed with terminal cancer. So that was like this other pivot point for me. It ignited the judo player. How do we beat this thing? What is out there physically that sort of, what can we do with the body to kind of overcome this challenge? And we looked at lots of different treatment methods, lots of alternatives, lots of conventional methods. It was a terminal diagnosis. So put a lot of stress and strain on everything. A lot of fear in there as well. So that kind of opened up this world of mental emotional space. Well, what can we do to manage ourselves through this stressful time? And I think when somebody says, you're not going to live forever and you might actually die in the next year, then it raises a lot of questions. What happens when we die? This kind of, why are we here? Where do we go? And I think, so that experience kind of opened up this whole gateway of physical, mental, emotional, but also very spiritual. And I didn't find breathing through that time. I think if somebody told me just to breathe, I probably would have just rolled my eyes or stuck my fingers up and said, I was in this kind of urgency. It felt like there was a ticking time bomb, and it was try and find this magic cure outside of ourselves. I didn't actually explore inwardly, apart from just meditating or doing these things to kind of just manage the stress and strain of that moment. So sadly, she passed away. She didn't make it. And I always wish that I could say breathing saved her and whatnot, but that wasn't the course of that moment. She passed away, and it sent me into a pretty bad headspin, quite a negative spiral. I kind of took it on because we made a lot of decisions together, and I felt like, oh, should we have gone left instead of right? So I kind of brought on a lot of guilt, a lot of shame, or a lot of anger and frustration. And I didn't really know how to cope with the loss. I didn't really know how to work through the grief. I knew how to slam doors and punch walls, or I could completely withdraw and not hope that nobody would want to speak to me or see me. So that was the only way that I could kind of manage my emotions through that grieving process, until something magical happened. I took my mum for Mother's Day to a breathing workshop. That's as far as I thought about it. My mum, she's a yoga instructor, so she's certainly all about breathing, and I just thought she'd love it. So I took her and we went together, and it was there in that session that the light bulb really switched on. I was like, wow, something magical happened. Physically, I felt like such a surge of energy moving through my body. Emotionally, I felt like I released the weight of the world that I'd been carrying. I bawled my eyes out. And then spiritually, I felt my girlfriend came and held my hand. I said, this is exactly where you're meant to be, which was caused me more emotions, and this spiral of like feeling, but really, really feeling this raw feeling for the first time, for the first time in a long time. And so that's what got me to kind of look at breathing, this big moment of girlfriend passing, but me stepping into that class And I thought, right, either someone's spiked my drink before coming into this workshop, and they certainly weren't the type to do that, or I'm going completely mad. That was my other option. Or maybe there's something special in breathing that I've overlooked my whole life, that we have this tool right under our nose that we can use to transform the way we think, feel, connect to ourselves and the world around us. So that's where I kind of set off. I thought, wow, let's see if this was a one-off. Let's come again. And I started working very closely with the facilitator there to just uncover what that was. And the more I practiced, the more questions I had. And that particular modality of breathing was very spiritually taught and led. And I could get my head around that because the experience I was having was confirming what they were talking about. But I felt like there was a bit of kind of lacking in my scientific mind, like what is actually happening here? Why is my brain creating this experience, or is this experience real? That was the other thing I kept saying. Is she there holding my hand, or is this my imagination? And so it brought a lot of questions, and the more I practiced, the more benefits I felt, from energy levels increasing, sleeping improving, less stress, voice being kinder to me, and sort of noticing my inner voice was glass half full instead of half empty, and all these kind of noticeable changes. And people start saying, "Oh, do you look, your eyes look different?" And I was like, "What? This is just this breathing that I'm doing." And that was it. The more I practiced, the more I uncovered, the more I wanted to know, the more I wanted to share that with the world. And shortly after, I went off and trained in many different breathing schools and practices. Believe it or not, there is lots. And they don't always chat to each other, because there's some that really about this kind of emotional release and quite powerful practices. And then there's the kind of more respiratory consultancy, which is actually looking at the mechanics and the chemistry and what happens when we breathe. And then when kind of combining the two, you can start looking at performance breath. And so there's lots of different ways we can uncover how to use our breath. So that's what I did. I just went headfirst into finding as much as I possibly could, and then applying it to all walks of life. Anybody and everybody that is looking to navigate life's ups and downs, or find an edge, whatever field that is, whether that's personally, whether that's professionally, whether that's in sports, whether that is just navigating one of life's challenges like a grievance, or a bereavement, or even just feeling. Grief's a funny one, because it could just be losing a sense of self. It doesn't have to be losing a sense of a person in your life. You can feel the sense of grief and you don't know why you're feeling a certain way. So that's me in a nutshell. What brought me to breath and breathing, and fast forward to today. I've been really, you said at the beginning, worked with many people, and it's just been amazing to be able to share this gift that everyone already has. That's the beautiful thing.
And it's free.
It's free. Yeah, it's free, it's legal. And yeah, it's so accessible.
It's there all the time, just on our, like, at our fingertips.
Yeah, it's at our fingertips. It's this like magic thing that not only can change the way you feel and think within a couple of minutes, if you can ramp yourself up or calm yourself down very, very quickly, or just kind of release these deeper parts of trauma and emotion, or our baggage that we're carrying around, to align us with what we really desire. But then the thing that I find just so magical is we're all breathing the same air. So it's the same air that flows through every single one of us. I shared something recently on my socials for World Breathing Day, and I love this thought. It's using stats. So some crude assumptions on airflow, but it's said that statistically we breathe at least one molecule of oxygen of every single person in the planet. And not just every single person alive right now, every single person that's ever lived on the planet. So I think it's such a amazing way to look at it. that kind of phrase, "we are all one," used to put my head in a spin a little bit, and it's kind of thrown around quite a lot. But when we think about breath and breathing as this web, like this internet of connection between all living things on this planet, we are actually all connected via this string of breath between us all. And I love thinking about that. It kind of moves you from this kind of individual person to this kind of connected ecosystem of life, which I love.
Stuart, that was such a beautiful introduction to this podcast. Thank you for sharing your story. I think, listening to you talk, you had obviously gone through watching your girlfriend be sick, and you went from this super high stress state of trying to fight into then this super high stress state of grieving. And I think that is really what makes people resonate with you so much, is that you actually have really had to live such deep experiences from such a young age, and you've had to find strategies that actually work. And I think it's so cool that obviously there's this huge scientific element to breathing, but what you do is you actually bring in the spiritual dimension to it. And it's one of the reasons I really wanted to bring you on the show, because love at first science, of course, one of the things I love about the whole topic of science is that we do get to inquire. And one of the very deep elements of science is that we acknowledge we don't know. And as soon as someone says we know, then they don't really know. And this is why I thought I have to bring Stuart onto the podcast, because he has a glimpse into how this truly, it's something we process in our bodies every day. There are these molecules, like we've got the studies to show how it works. We've got the scans. And then you come along and you're like, and actually, I also had these transformative experiences, which are very hard to define. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to bring you to talk more about this, because I want to ask you a little bit about the basics of effective breathing and, little strategies that we can weave into our lives to make the podcast practical for people. But I also really want you to talk about how breathing can actually create these transformations, because when I look at the world around me, I realize how desperate people are for change, and that often they aren't given the right tools and they turn to things like alcohol and drugs and Netflix and escapism.
Yeah. There's a lot, they're trying to avoid being fully present. Being fully present with what is. And if we're unconditionally present with what is, we have to feel what's there. And that's uncomfortable. And that's either an unconscious choice, because our mind is always trying to keep us safe and keep us from hurting. So it avoids ourselves from feeling. But I think what I love about it's so funny, because at the beginning of my journey, I've come from a world of performance, from judo. It was all science, like perform, train hard, you win, do X, Y, Z, and it makes Y, X, Y, that makes you win. And it was the same with maths. Here's the formulas, that's what you get. So it's like my whole mind and I was such a skeptic when it came to these things, or I just needed proof every single time. Oh, okay, well, what's happened there? How is that possible? What's going on? Where's the scientific evidence? And for me, it was like the proof was starting to be in the pudding. And I was like, it was my mum again, because I'd be questioning the whole time, what's happening in these sessions? She's like, well, how do you feel? I'm like, I feel way better. Does it matter? And I'm like trying to question these things.
Yes.
So and I often get many skeptics, because I talk about more spiritual aspects now, because the more I've experienced, and it's not, when I say experience, it's not all just my own experience.
Yeah, you've witnessed it.
The magic that sometimes happens in sessions with people, even just the last Wednesday, I did an online session, and somebody messaged me that night after the session. She said her husband had passed away, and he came to her in that, very similar to my story. And that's why it resonated so much. So her husband passed away about 10 months ago, and she felt him there, and he came to her in the session. And it brings a tear to my eye, because it resonated so well. It was so similar to my story, but it's that same magic. I'm like, these things happen over and over and over again. And a scientist a hard-nosed scientist that was maybe quite rigid in what that is. Say, oh, this is this, or you're causing so much stress because the breathing's stressful, and that's causing them to flood the brain with X, Y, Z. There's so many different ways we often try to explain things in a scientific way with what we know, but sometimes we just don't know.
I know.
And for me, that I find that so good. Like sometimes when I go into a corporate or a business, when I'm doing some more business work, and it's a room full of skeptics, I love it, because I think skepticism is a questioning. As long as it's skepticism with an open mind. If you're just like, no, but
that's very frustrating, of course.
Yeah, that's frustrating. But if there's a level of skepticism, it's a level of questioning. Saying, well, wait a second, but how does that work? Oh, and once you can convert the skeptic through experience, which was my own story too, then it starts to open up. Well, let's figure out what's happening here. What's going on? And for me, I'd kind of been sold by the experience that I was having, and then I went off and trained, and I saw all these other people having similar experiences or similar but different, whether that is all of a sudden doing a session, forgiving someone, but being able to quantify that in a scientific way has been quite hard. And I was kind of forced into a corner myself with this in quite a fun way. And it was through now a very close friend and mentor of mine, Dr. Norman Rosenthal, who I talk about in my book as well, because we met at a conference in Ibiza. It was a conference, the International Music Summit, which is, they were looking at ways, obviously music, but one of the things was looking at mental health in the music industry. And I was asked to come and run some workshops, and Dr. Norman Rosenthal, who's one of the pioneers for seasonal affective disorder, who first described it. And he also tours the world, talk about transcendental meditation. So people had done a session with me and all had quite a profound experience. And Dr. Norman heard that, and we jumped in a like a minibus to go to the venue one morning, and he turned around. I hadn't spoken to him yet, I hadn't met him yet. And he's got an air of intelligence. He looks like a scientist. And he turned around to me and said, Stuart, I want to know more about this breathing technique that you've been taking people through. What's the science? And he kind of just threw in with this question, like a question that I'd been trying to uncover myself. And I was like, oh, well, it's a little bit patchy. And there was a bit of a
great answer.
Moment. Yeah, I was like, it's a bit patchy, but you should do a session. And yeah, later on, he asked if he could come and do a session, and we did a session together. And I can share the story because he's already okayed it for the book. So he came and did a session with me, and at the beginning of the session, I explained that sometimes emotion will stir in these sessions. Anything in the emotional spectrum might unveil itself as we go through the practice. And he kind of put his hand on my knee. I went, Stuart, I've been a therapist for 40 years. I very much doubt that anything's going to come up. And then we started the session, and he laughed, he cried, he went through rage, and he kind of went through everything, more so than a lot of other people. And I was like, whoa, wow, this is a powerful session for him. And at the end of the session, he came round and gave him some water, and I said, oh, do you want to just talk about share anything that came up for you? He just said, that was very interesting. And then he collected his stuff, and I was like, anything else? He's like, no, that was very interesting. And he collected his stuff and went off to his room. And I was like, oh, wow. Oh, what? And I didn't really hear much from him because he had an early flight the next day back to Washington. And then I got a phone call a week later, and it was Dr. Norm. And he said, I was deeply touched by that session. He said, I've not felt the power of anything like that before, and it was through breathing. And I've gone off and I've done some homework, and you're right, it's a bit patchy on the science. Would you like to do some? Because people need to know about this. So we went off together, and we've been working together, and he's been guiding me to collect anecdotal at first, so we can start to categorize experience. So we can say, well, okay, out of 1,000 people here, there's certain categories people are falling into. This isn't just by chance. something's happening here. So that's what we've been conducting at the moment, which is really exciting, because it's both him as a mentor going through, which is what he does, to have this kind of, this is how you conduct the scientific way, and then uncovering this rich data from people doing these sessions that kind of says, well, no, this isn't one's off. This is reoccurring. This happens. People can overcome trauma. People can work through deep parts of themselves through this means or modality of breathing, so that they can make a massive leap forward in their life. They can let go of the baggage and bricks that they're holding on to, and they can realign with their true essence of self and purpose and meaning, and have these beautiful, profound, transcendent experiences, whether that is connection to someone that's no longer here, or whether that's a deep connection to a state of love or peace or bliss. And that for me is just super exciting, to be able to have that support, but also start to collate and bring this data into field, because that's what science is about. Like you said, it's kind of questioning and trying to figure things out.
And staying open, right?
Yeah.
Because yes, you being the mathematician, you'll know we've got our quantitative methods of analysis. But one of the things I love about science, and people forget this, is that you've got your qualitative studies that have uncovered so much that we haven't got an A equals B answer for. But the recognition that these things are out there, I think, is so powerful. People forget that actually these types of studies can reveal so much. I don't know if you're allowed to, because obviously sometimes studies have to be kept a little bit secret before they're published, but have you unlocked anything that you'd like to share with us now? And please don't worry if it's a little too early to share anything.
Yeah, well, it's a little bit early. We're still kind of going through it. What's been what's been nice for me is it's just clarified everything that's already been happening on paper and putting it all into one place. And for me, it's this release of old trauma. People are able to release old trauma, and that happens time and time again in these sessions. And that for me is quite an amazing space. And I put myself back into that place when I was going through grief. And everybody said, I say everybody, friends, family, were worried about me because I wasn't in a good place. And everybody kept on saying, go and speak to someone, go and see a therapist. And in my closed-minded way, I'll share a little bit more about this as well as we go on, because what this all uncovered for me was actually the way I was operating as a human being. It wasn't just grief. It was my way of releasing grief, or my way of managing grief was dictated because of my past. So my whole life, my notion of strength was be there, be solid, be strong, be that judo player, 4 years old on the judo mat, win, work hard, win. Like these were like my core beliefs. So when I lost, because she passed away and she died, and that stake was so high in my core beliefs, it shattered me completely. But still I was holding on to this notion of strength, and that was big boys don't cry. So my core belief, do not cry. I was allowed, in my core beliefs, I was allowed to punch the wall and shout and scream. I could have an outburst because that was a manly thing to do, and you're allowed to do that, and you could shout and scream. Or I could just withdraw completely. And in that withdrawal state, no one would see me. So I'd be safe. So for me, that experience of grief was actually my inability to be vulnerable through that process, to process my emotion, to actually allow myself to feel. And that's what, when everybody was saying to me at that moment was, you need to go and speak to somebody. Well, I came up with a wall again. I'm not going to speak to a therapist. They weren't in the hospital. They weren't with me. They don't know what I'd done. They're just there to ask me questions. And I know the value of therapy now, of course. It's such an important tool. But in my closed-minded way, I didn't want to speak to anybody. And there was no way you would get me to go off and speak to somebody. I'd closed off completely to that form of treatment.
That's quite common, by the way.
Yeah,
I think there's quite a few people, particularly men, who are going to be like, nah.
Yeah, I'm fine. I've got it.
Yeah, like what is talking going to do?
What's talking going to do? Exactly. And what I did, obviously, was breathing, and it did all the talking for me. I didn't have to speak to anybody. I released everything I needed to release energetically from my body, released the pain, the sadness, the trauma. I had these experiences like she was there, or like I shared, very profound, very confusing at sometimes. But the more I did it, the more I'd peel off these layers, and the more I became open and free of the shackle of strength that I'd, the version of strength that I'd created for myself. And in that, letting go of control, because that was the other thing. For me, strength came with control. And of course, control gives us strength. But if we're trying to control everything, we actually don't.
Holds you back
massively.
You back.
Exactly. So looking at this data, it's uncovering all these things that I've experienced for myself. I'm with many, many clients, and we've close to 1,000 people through that study, which is a significant amount now. But it's showing that this is a valid tool, or there is lots of richness in this data to say that, yeah, well, this is a really, really good tool for a therapeutic benefit. And that particular way of breathing, I know we're kind of pigeonholing around this one style of breathing because there's many different ways, is a more dynamic form of breathing. It is more hyperventilation, and usually that brings up alarms, rightfully so, because if we're hyperventilating, our body's going to be out of sync. We're breathing too much, chemistry changes, and it's usually synced with anxiety or stress or panic attacks. So we try and avoid it, and day to day, that's exactly right. So a lot of sort of the scientific breathing community have initially said, oh, well, no, you should avoid hyperventilation at all costs. And I understand that, but that equally it's like, well, actually therapeutic benefits of doing this in a safe, controlled environment. And with a trained practitioner who can allow people to open into this space, to feel what they need to feel, to open up that realm of emotion and even the spiritual space, so that they can free themselves from their past and arrive back feeling a little bit more aligned, a bit more energy, their sleep improves, their energy, and then start using more functional breath practices to kind of manage everything and get the mechanics working correctly again. So that's what I think's what amazing about this study is just clarifying everything I've been talking about for a long time, but just having it there on that white paper to say, well, yes, this is what's happening, and this is a significant amount of people. And then the next phase is say, well, can we uncover what is happening in the body to make that happen? Is what is causing the experiences to be often otherworldly? Or how can we push ourselves into the space where we can have such a profound experience? And that, for me, I think is just so exciting. And there's a few decent studies that are going alongside this as well. There's a study at Imperial London now as well, looking at this style of breathing as a tool for therapeutic use. So I think it's all kind of catching up, and that's such an exciting space.
We're actually at the precipice of, I think, a huge shift coming into the trauma management world, because I think there are certain tools that are highly effective that have been used for many, many years. But I think to say that it's right for everyone is very misguided. And look, I paint the same brush with the breath practice. You know, I say breathing, obviously, as you have explained eloquently and perfectly, is obviously a very powerful treatment tool, but maybe it's not right for everybody. So we've got all these tools. And I just think, why would we not add more tools to the toolkit? Because at some point you're going to be met with someone who doesn't want to do the talking. It may be too painful for them to have to go through all the experiences. I know somebody close to me who, if they had to go through and talk about every single experience, I don't think it's going to be very supportive for that person. But potentially not having them to go mentally to that place through a breathing practice would be far more effective.
Yeah. And like you said, it's different tools for different people, or different times in your life as well.
Mm-hmm.
They resonate. Now you can't stop me talking. So it's it's gone the other way, and I really value the use of words. I think what I really uncovered with that is words are the best we have to communicate, but it puts experiences into boxes, or it puts feelings into boxes. Now, for me, feeling is not 3D or even 2D of words. So if I jumped in a swimming pool and you'd never in your life been in any water, and I got out and you said, how does it feel? For me to explain the feeling of being in the swimming pool to you, having never ever been in water, I could say it through words, but you wouldn't quite grasp it unless you jumped in the pool. Or it's the same with music. I could try and sing you a song or try and explain how the song sounds, but you'd never experience the song unless you listen to it. Now, when we're trying to explain our past, or uncover or consciously direct our thoughts to heal our past, yes, can be very effective to understand and to cognitively understand why we are operating a certain way, or why we're feeling a certain way, or what's going on for us. But what is really powerful about breathing is we can access the feeling. We can actually we jump in the pool, we're there. And it needs to be done in a very safe way, because you mentioned trauma. We trauma release, we can be taking people into this feeling that feels very, very uncomfortable. And what happens is we have this integration cycle of emotion. So any trapped emotion or anything that we're holding on to energetically, it's usually held in our breathing cycle. And it's held in our breathing cycle is because when we go through emotional experience, we hold our breath to stop ourselves from feeling. Mm-hmm. Now, that might be holding your breath because you are really angry and you don't want to punch somebody, and you're holding your breath. You have this contraction of your breathing muscles. Our breathing muscles either contract or they expand. When we're feeling joy and we're feeling good, our breath is open and it's expansive. When we're stressed, well, our shoulders go to our ears, our posture changes, and we start to feel this tension in our body. Even if we don't allow ourselves to feel good, it takes weight, it takes a contraction of our breathing. So a big example would be if we're finding something funny, but we're not allowed to laugh. We hold our breath to stop the laughter. So this is something that we learn. This is a learned habit that we have, even from a baby being shushed not to cry. We start to arrive into this awareness of this world as this kind of open awareness to realize that it's not okay to always fully feel. It's not okay to fully feel. I can't, as an adult, a toddler might still be quite open in their awareness and moving through emotions quite quickly, being kind of at a tantrum and then being all happy all of a sudden, and having this quite simple emotional processing, which Harvard study says 90 seconds to fully process emotion, which I think is amazing and straight and bizarre, because it definitely takes longer than it takes years sometimes to hold on to things. But 90 seconds, that's from the moment we're triggered to allow ourselves to feel completely, for that integration cycle to naturally take its course, and for us not to be holding on and letting our breath open and expand. And our breath is a key part in that. But what we tend to do is we hold our breath, we hold on. That might be because consciously we think it's not appropriate to have a tantrum in the supermarket, or to laugh at that inappropriate time, or to cry in front of our peers at work or boss, whatever it is. We hold on and we tighten up and we contract our breathing and we stop our emotions from flowing. So what this allows us to do is basically, when we start working with our breath, we can open up through those restrictive conditioning of our breath. And that constriction, it might have been a thought, let's hold that in. But if that becomes habitual because of the stressful day becoming a stressful week, becoming a stressful year, or that frustration builds up and up and up, but we can't express it, then we change our breathing pattern completely. So our natural breathing pattern from this kind of our baby breath, if everything's good when we're born. We've got this lovely open flowing breath, diaphragm's working, breathing in and out of our nose, and everything's open and expansive and free. Then everything starts to get rigid or changes, and we start to have these bad habits of breathing. In my book, I talk about the breathing archetypes and how people fall into these different categories of breathing. And because the way we breathe, the rhythm, rate, and depth of which we breathe triggers our brain to react a certain way because it's a cue from our breath to tell us what's going on, to trigger our nervous system, maybe on or off, or sympathetic or parasympathetic. So if our breathing is changed because of an experience in our life where we've been holding on, then we actually start to act out a different way. Of our mind starts to change and mold differently. So we can almost tell how somebody's going to be as a person just by the way they breathe. And I find that fascinating, because also what we can do is actually rewind that and say, well, you don't actually have to be that person. You can change a lot about yourself just by changing the way you breathe, letting go of some of this tension that you're holding in your breathing cycle. That might be tension in the shoulders, that might be tension in the diaphragm, it could be down into the psoas muscles, it could be into the abdominals, or even into the back where we hold a lot of stuff we don't want to see, the guilt and shame, etc. So I find it just so fascinating, because we see these people all day. You jump on the public transport and you see these different postures, you can tell, and it's just our cues about what's going on about that person through the way that we breathe. And we do this intuitively. And what I mean by that, if I all of a sudden came on this call and we hadn't pressed start or play, and I was hi, how's it going? Yeah, you'd say, right, okay, Stu's either run up the stairs or something's just happened, and usually you try and match that breathing. She'd be like, oh, what's going on? Oh, okay. So we start to because of empathy, we start to match those around us. So when we start to uncover this and we all start looking back to the way we breathe in these different archetypes and what's happening in our life that's causing us to hold restriction in our breathing cycle, when we actually just uncover, well, how am I breathing? What's going on with me? What's causing me to breathe this certain way? I don't really need to know. I can just start to try and open it up and try and move through some of these restrictive patterns, release whatever's I'm holding on to. And usually that comes with emotional release, because it's something that we're not allowed ourselves to feel. And when that releases, everything starts to open up and everything starts to balance itself out. And from there, we start to find a bit more flow in our life and find a bit more flow in our day.
And sometimes we don't even need to change anything, but simply the act of awareness
Awareness is
entirely
biggest.
Yeah, it's the biggest part. It's the first step that we're most reluctant to take, as with all good things. This is often the way. And then as soon as you take it, you're like, huh.
Yeah. Well, awareness gives us a choice. And sometimes awareness, we talked about avoidance earlier on in this call, and numbing ourselves with whatever it is so that we don't feel. So awareness is like all of a sudden just like really aware. How am I feeling? Like really, how am I feeling right now? What's going on for me? Awareness of breath. Where's my breath flowing? How's my body feel? Like tuning into all those cues and whispers that our body will give us. And from that awareness, we can say, well, that's not quite the way it should be going. So let's uncover a little bit more about that. And that's what I just love about awareness, because awareness is the first step. But it's one of the biggest steps, because from awareness, then you can make a change. And then that the awareness part is often the hardest part to take, because it's often uncomfortable. And having awareness of those maybe parts of ourselves that we've hidden away from the world, the parts of ourselves that we don't want the world to see, that part is really hard to start looking and uncovering, but sometimes the most rewarding part of the work that we can do. kind of looking in the shadows and allowing ourselves to illuminate those areas of our life so that we can be free from those shackles of our experience.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm having a very deep therapy session with you right now. I hope you realize you have a very powerful impact on those that you talk to. I'm just looking in the corner of my glance at the time, and it always stresses me out that I want to talk like 7 hours to you, but obviously that would not be practical for you. So
We haven't really started yet.
exactly, this is how things go. Particularly when I talk to people like you, I find that this is often how conversations end up unraveling. But I feel like we've already done some very amazing things have already happened. But one of the things that I really want to get all of the calls that I put out there to at least share a couple of effective tools that the everyday person that maybe hasn't had these deep experiences, but maybe knows that something needs to happen. Is there just a couple of little practical things? I know we spoke about awareness, maybe just observing your own breath, I think could be the first step. And you even spoke about, the ability to match someone empathetically. Maybe you could be the higher conscious version of that. And by being slower and more calm, the other person then matches you. But you've worked with so many people. So I'm sure you've had this question before, like, what's just a couple of practical little things that if more people did this, they would be, I don't know, the world would be a better place.
Yeah, and there's different levels to it. There's the very kind of mechanical side of breathing that is important. And that's, we mentioned awareness. Awareness is really, really key in that first step. So there's a little fly coming across. Awareness is that first step. And that can come with just like stopping and pausing and slowing down for a moment and allowing yourself to feel. When it comes to breathing, I often look at these 5 areas with people. The first one is breathing at rest. How am I breathing at rest? Because if your breathing at rest is out, then everything else will be out. So it's probably the most key thing is that when I'm lying on the sofa or sitting down or taking a moment, stop and pause, notice where your breath is flowing. Inquire, slow it down. How does it feel to slow down? Does that start to create this feeling that you're not getting enough air? So when we're kind of uncovering our breath, the key things that we need to use, quite obvious ones, is using our nose to breathe. Filters the air, gets the perfect moisture and temperature to your lungs, flushes the air with nitric oxide, and slows the breath down to a rate that keeps us calm and relaxed. The other thing is using our diaphragm. So when we're breathing in, does our belly come out? It's not a force of the belly, but it's this displacement of air and organs downwards so that our lower torso rises before the chest.
Thank you for saying that, because I come from the yoga world where everyone's taught to pull their stomach into their spine for stability, which we now know is you need your diaphragm for central stability. So thank you for saying that.
Yeah, but it's diaphragm doesn't. I often think the diaphragm doesn't get much street cred because when you breathe in and when you flex your diaphragm, your stomach sticks out. So it's kind of, people think, oh, I need to hold it in. I need to have that flat stomach or have that slim waistline. And when we're holding our stomach in, well, we're actually not breathing properly, which will actually mean we won't digest our food properly. Will actually affect our weight altogether. So it's really important that we do use our diaphragm for, you said, stability, digestion, calm response. It's a massive muscle. It doesn't fatigue like the intercostals. So it's really, really important that we use our diaphragm. So diaphragm, making sure our diaphragm is working. So it's contracting downwards, it's opening up, a bit like a parachute. It moves downwards like that, and our belly will rise. So they're the kind of 2 key things, and just slowing your breath down, allowing it to feel slow. And if you're slowing your breath down, noticing how that feels. If you're slowing your breath down and it's starting to make you scream for air, well, that actually might mean that you are stuck in a fast rhythm of breathing because of the chemistry in your body. Because breathing is a very physical thing. So if it's like putting energy. it's like putting fuel in your car. If I needed to do some star jumps and jumped up and down really quickly, well, my muscles need more energy. So I'm going to breathe a bit more. My heart, which is the pump, is going to pump faster. More carbon dioxide is created. So we have this faster rate of respiration. Now, that also happens in demand to what's happening around us, because our mind is always wanting to keep us safe. So it's always looking for the tigers and bears in the room to get us out of danger at any moment in time. So our mind will override how our breathing is to get us out of danger. Now, our mind, our unconscious mind, does not know the difference between the threat in the room and the threat fabricated through thought. It triggers the same breathing response. So fortunately, there's not many tigers roaming around anymore. We might still have those stress responses, maybe crossing the road and a car whips around the corner from nowhere. Our breathing changes and we leap back to the pavement. So our stress response is really important. But the challenge that we have is majority of our stresses are in our mind. What I've got to do, the to-do list, the should-do list,
emails. You just open your phone and you're like,
Yeah, we're in a culture that is always on, always switched on, always there's high expectations for everyone to do the whole time. And when we sit and be, it feels quite a challenge. That's why so many people are so challenged by meditation, because they have to be all of a sudden, and it's really uncomfortable. And so just to recap, kind of a little bit of home practice. Can you breathe through your nose? Can you challenge yourself to breathe through your nose for a whole day? I mean, it's how we should be breathing anyway. And then notice when you're not breathing through your nose. Now, we said breathing at rest. Next one is how are you breathing throughout your day at work? Your breathing at rest might change all of a sudden when you enter the office and you brace your body and you try and be a certain persona for the boss or for the team or whatever it is. Does your breathing change? The amount of people that I speak to that say, I don't ever breathe when I'm typing my emails, or I forget to breathe when I'm at work, and they freeze. So what happens is carbon in that freeze state, while they're thinking so hard that they forget to breathe, then carbon dioxide increases. When we start to map it, then they take a big gasp of air. I've not been breathing. So they have this big gasp and they start to have this very jagged breath response, which is sending this signal to the brain. So it's a very incoherent signal from the breath to the heart to the brain. If we can start to balance that out and have this smooth signal, then we feel in more flow, we feel more relaxed, we feel more energized, we feel more focused, our energy doesn't dip as much throughout the day. So figuring out, how am I breathing at rest? Am I using my nose? Am I using my diaphragm? What's happening when I go off and do whatever it is throughout the day, majority of the time, whether that is work related, whether that's studying, that might be posture related too. Really important posture. If we're sat at our desk all day, hunched over a laptop, well, our ability to breathe could even be clothing choice. High-waisted jeans.
Agreed. Tight stuff around your middle.
Tight belts. Yeah.
Kills me. I can't wear tight clothes.
Yeah.
I've lived in yoga leggings for too long.
Yeah, well, COVID did that, didn't it? I've never really gone back to jeans since COVID. I'm like, no, I'm just gonna wear comfies forevermore now. So I looked at breathing at rest, breathing throughout the day. The next one that I like to uncover for people, and it's fun, but one of the hard ones to switch and change, is breathing when we're speaking. Most people gasp for air through their mouth when they're speaking a lot. So if you're in a sales job, if you are somebody that just talks a lot, I often call them breath grabbers, because they talk.
Oh my God, this is me.
Yeah, and a breath grabber. I sometimes fall, when you get excited, you kind of fall into these archetypes. Excuse me, sorry, my phone was just ringing. You sometimes fall into these archetypes throughout the day. Different people get you all excited, and you start breathing through your mouth, and that mouth breath, like that, is the same mouth breath that I talked about if we stepped off the pavement onto oncoming traffic. That gasp of air. So we're triggering the stress response. Sympathetic drive kicks in, heart rate goes up, blood pressure goes up, and it's all because of the way that we breathe. So you might find that when you speak, you're talking a lot, you're breathing a lot through the mouth, and you're maybe switching the stress response on. Now, the way to breathe and speak, now this is quite challenging, is we talk out through the mouth and breathe in through the nose.
That is so challenging, especially if you're a fast talker like me.
Yes, it is. It is challenging. And it takes a bit of practice. The best way to practice is just reading out loud.
Okay, this is definitely going to be something I bring into my world. I'm so happy you said this.
What tends to happen at first is we start to overthink, because speaking is like a rhythmic thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we're so used to speaking and breathing in a certain way. And then when we try and switch it round, it's like, oh, I'm not getting my words across. It feels really bizarre at first. And it doesn't have to be every breath, but the majority of the time, breathing through your nose as much as possible.
Yeah.
The next point is breathing and sleeping. Now, breathing and sleeping is, I guess, a little bit challenging because we're asleep, but we want to be doing the same thing. We're using a diaphragm, we're using our nose. The simplest, most effective way to fix our breathing when we sleep is to pop tape on our mouth when we go to bed.
And I actually do this.
Amazing.
I tape my mouth every night, and I'm so addicted to it now, because one of the things I do as my morning practice is I do air hunger walking, and I'm trying to get my steps up to 100. 100 on a single. I breathe out, guys, just so you know this, how it works. Then I hold my breath and I try and do as many steps as possible. My max was 60, but because I got sick, I then dropped down to 40. But I find that if I don't tape my mouth, it goes down to 20. I can only do 20 steps if I don't tape my mouth every night. If I tape my mouth every night, I'm hovering around 40.
Wow, that's amazing to notice the difference.
And massive.
Yeah, it's a big difference. And that's amazing that you do that as well, because it's really using hypoxic training like that, and in different formats. Often how I work with athletes, how do you really push their ability to their breathing economy? How do we push their aerobic threshold, which is what that is? Can we get more from our breath? Because the more we go into breath hold practice, now there's a difference. Just before I say breath holds, there's a difference between unconscious breath holds, which is the ones we might do unconsciously throughout the day, which creates stress.
Yeah.
And consciously holding your breath because you're deliberately wanting to go into a breath hold and hold your breath. When we go into the conscious breath holds, carbon dioxide increases. This change in carbon dioxide levels the body doesn't like, because the body becomes too acidic. So the body, if we're practicing it a couple of days a week, a couple of times a week, then the body says, right, a bit like altitude, it says, oh, what are we going to do here? So it starts to create more red blood cells. So red blood cells are the carrier cells of oxygen. So all of a sudden, people think, oh, I've taken a breath, it's arriving to where it needs to go. Not always. So if we practice like what you're doing, we have better breathing economy, and we can actually, and the funny thing is, it's how I was working with athletes, but it's actually how I help people rehabilitate with long COVID, which are a real big thing for people, this feeling of breathlessness, this chest pains, etc. And that was quite it's the same whether you're going for gold as an Olympic athlete or whether you're actually just wanting to improve getting up the stairs without feeling breathless, or improving how you're breathing. It's really, really important. So yes, breathing and sleeping. Back to that, what we were saying, breathing and sleeping is really best thing to do is pop a bit of tape over your mouth. Obviously check that you can breathe through your nose. I usually say if you can do tape for 20 minutes throughout the day, then you're fine to do nighttime. I think the world record breath holds like 24 minutes or something. So 20 minutes, you're going to be fine. If you can do 20 minutes, you'll be able to do night taping. And the reality is, for the first couple of weeks, it's going to come off.
And I just wanted to quickly say, sorry, I did the gasp, didn't I? And then you totally took that cue. I was like, yeah. For anyone who doesn't know, it does sound a bit strange to tape your mouth at night. And actually, the first time I heard about it, I thought it was really strange. I thought I would never in a million years do that. But as I said, I started trying it out. I had a lot of benefit for it. Stuart's just skimmed the surface as to some of the benefits that it can give you. But just so that those of you who are open to trying this, it's so cheap. You go to, I don't know, Amazon or any kind of medical online store, and it's called 3mm micropore tape. So it's very thin, and you don't type across the lips from one edge to the other, but rather from the upper lip to the lower lip, like a little, like the letter I, just from top to bottom. And it just keeps your lips closed so that as you sleep, you don't start breathing through your mouth, which obviously can change your blood biochemistry quite dramatically and even create alterations in your brainstem.
Yeah, it's you can buy it, micropore medical. You can buy it literally any pharmacy.
It's so cheap. Yeah, sorry,
Yeah, it's like
pharmacies. That's
£3.
what I wanted to
Yeah,
say.
any pharmacy. And to be honest, it's more of a deterrent. It's not about like duct taping your mouth up. And
No.
that's what I was saying. For the first couple of weeks, you'll wake up with the tape off for a lot of people, and then it's about just practicing and practicing until you wake up with it on, and then you know you've done a whole night with nasal breathing, and it's the benefits are so huge. And what you'll find when I was talking about breathing and speaking, the more you practice it, the more you'll find you're breathing through your nose throughout the day as well. The final fifth thing that we've kind of uncovered anyway is breathing and physical exercise. So when we've got breathing and rest, we've got breathing throughout the day, we've got breathing and speaking, which is also throughout the day, breathing and sleeping, but then also this kind of, when I ramp things up, how am I breathing during my given sport? Every sport is slightly different. Obviously, swimming, you're in the water, it's different. You breathe through your mouth when you're swimming. Weightlifting is going to be very different from other forms of exercise, but a lot of exercise we can start to really hone in how are we breathing, how are we gasping for air, when are we switching from this kind of aerobic respiration to anaerobic respiration, and trying to work with those so that we can really start to improve our fitness just by the way we breathe. So I've had amazing results, like astonishing results with people working with, like, usually 30% increase in repeat sprintability is what the studies were around for rugby players. And repeat sprintability, a bit like the bleep test, how you can keep on going at your max. And it's just fascinating to see that just simply changing your breath can give you that increment of increase. But then again, it makes so much sense, because what causes us to drop out or not go that extra round or stop running that final mile is because, well, we're out of breath, or we've got so much lactic acid in our body, which is also to do with breathing. If we can start to manage both those things, then we've got a better level of fitness and ability to keep performing at a high level.
Stuart, can you just clarify how you want people to breathe whilst they're exercising?
Well, it depends what we're doing, but it's the same. We want to be using our diaphragm, want to be using our nose to breathe as much as we can.
It's hard. Cardio with just nasal. I went for a 20-minute run yesterday, nasal breathing.
Amazing.
It's very hard.
I usually get people to use your nose like a smartwatch. So your nose, I talked about aerobic respiration, anaerobic. So just to quickly clarify what they are, aerobic respiration is creating energy from the oxygen in the air around us, arrives at our cells, combined with glucose, creates ATP, an energy source that our cells need. Anaerobic is when we can't have that exchange happen quick enough, so we use our own sugars in our body to create that same result. It's not as effective. It uses a lot more energy to do it, which is also why some people train anaerobically, because it burns more energy. But if we're looking at a level of fitness, when we are wanting to do some sort of exercise, usually when we switch from our nose to our mouth, we switch to anaerobic. That's what, roughly speaking, not every time, but roughly speaking, creates more stress in the body. So if we can manage to build ourselves up, and often I say, look, you've got your maybe timed runs and all your other running that you might be doing, but then also introduce nose only run. And the nose only run means that you forget about the time, you got your distance or whatever it is. And if that means you get to the hill and you need to walk up the hill, but keep nose only, stay nose only. Stay nose only for the whole run, no matter what. That might mean that you're running and stopping and walking and catching your breath, but catching your breath through your nose until you can do the full run nose only, like you did the other day, your 20 minutes. And again, we're basically forcing the body, like what you're doing with your air hunger walks. You're forcing the body to have this high rate of carbon dioxide, so it starts to adjust and make a change. If we then all of a sudden start gasping through the mouth, that just breaks that whole plan that we're doing. So it's really important that if you're doing that form of training, to use your nose as much as possible. Even just for the lungs, you find people like wintertime going off for a run and gasping through their mouth, and it's just so cold on the lungs, and you're not getting that level of protection that the nose is
so much
designed to do.
pollution. Yeah, so much pollution
well.
we could totally avoid if we just used our nasal breathing instead.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much for sharing so many useful things, not only the brilliant scientific practical tools at the end, but the opening inspiration that all people should really be exploring these types of modalities. I am going to ask you at the end where people can find out more about you, because I'm sure lots of people listening are going to be very excited to do some kind of hardcore breathing trauma release sessions.
I think just to jump in there, hardcore breathing trauma release sessions, it's a tool that we can actually use, not just for, it's like, for me, when I go into those sessions now, I'm not going through all this trauma, etc., every single time. It allows us to move. We talked about avoidance or becoming very, very present. So if I have an experience, or I'm born into this world, and then I try to make sense of the world between the ages of 0 to 7, I'm trying to make sense of the world. So I create a manual on how to operate, which is our core beliefs. And then we get to an adult and we have an experience, like I said, big boys don't cry. I'm like, well, that's not a good belief to have anymore. So I need to change some of those core beliefs. I need to rewire the way that my brain is operating, the way that I'm triggered in the experience or people around me, to transcend these old habits, patterns, beliefs, conditioning that we have. Then we need to work through some of that stuff. But once we allow ourselves to work through that stuff, once we have that clearance, I think of it as like a big bag of bricks that we're carrying around. We start our life with an empty bag, and then through experiences, felt experiences, learned experiences, we put a boulder and brick in the bag. Now we can take the bag off for a moment and do a breath exercise to feel calm, but usually we have to pick the bag up and carry on. So that type of breath work we talked about at the beginning is really about emptying the boulders and bricks so that you feel lighter, more in tune, more aligned. And then when you go into that practice, for me, I go in and I get such clarity, or I just get such stillness and peace. It allows me to shift through the kind of egoic part of my mind and transcend that completely, so that I can sit in this space of stillness. And that for me is a really, really powerful tool. And I talked very briefly about meditation and people finding it hard to move into a being state. That's me. A hyper doer, wanting to get things done the whole time. Again, this past, got to train hard, got to do things to win and survive, and everything that built up through my life. So when it came to meditation, I found very hard. But using breath as the tool of meditation to allow me to still my mind enough. So using breath in a certain way to balance the system, still my mind, and then I can sit in stillness in a meditation and get a lot from it. Yeah. So although it is a tool for releasing trauma, it's also a tool for us to actually just connect with ourselves and resolve whatever it is. That might not be the trauma. That might just be a problem you're having at that moment, or a solution that you're looking for.
It's like a ladder
or insight. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a ladder. Like maybe with the first session, you're going to be doing some deep stuff, which is like from way back. But then as the years progress and as the time progresses, you're probably going to be just dealing with each day and each moment and each challenge as it comes and arises. But it's this ever evolving landscape, right? It's never always going to be the same.
I love that. Ever evolving landscape. Exactly. Great.
So I did want to ask, I am going to ask you where people can find out more about you, because I think everyone should be doing these kind of sessions. But before we ask you that, I ask all guests at the end of the interview. It doesn't have to do anything with what we've spoken about. It's literally what you wish A message that you could give the world somehow, if you could give them a message and everyone could implement this one thing, what would your one thing be?
Breathe would be one of them. I think that we're living in such an exciting time, but there's so much, it's like this polarity. There's such amazing things happening in humanity, but then there's also such challenges that we face. And at the end of the book, I share this quote, and it's a quote that I've kind of lived by for many years now, and it's Krishnamurti. You are what the world is, and without your transformation, there can be no transformation of the world. And that for me is something that I really has been the spear point of everything I do. Like if we're wanting to see change happen around us, then we need to start with ourselves. Now, everything I've talked about today is a perfect way to segue into that. Breathe and arrive back to a sense of self. But yeah, I think it's really, really important with everything that's happening around us, even things like natural disasters that we're seeing at the moment. I don't like to see these things at all. But what I mean is when I see these things happen in the world, I try and allow it to reflect to myself, how can I find more of what I need to resolve in myself? So if I see war, how can I find more peace within myself? If I see instability, how can I find more stability within myself? So back to that quote, you are what the world is. Like this is all just a reflection of our collective inner selves. Every idea, every thought, everything that's projected out into that collective consciousness. And when we start with ourselves and start to change and start to allow ourselves to work through some of this bag of bricks and feel what we need to feel and open ourselves up to free ourselves from our past, then our breathing will change. It will reflect differently on those around us. Those people around us will start to feel a bit better. They'll be inspired to do something a bit better. And before we know it, we have this ripple effect for everybody on the planet. And we hopefully won't see such turbulence or such volatility that we see. And I think volatility is probably the better word, because there's some great things that happen. There's there's this happening and this happening. And
it's
there's
very
so
intense
much.
life at the moment. It's so
very intense.
And to have tools like just slowing down with your breath. I mean, people cannot ever fathom how important these tools are during this time.
Yeah. Well, even that. So if we say things are intense, well, how can I reduce the intensity within myself? How can I find more calm? How can I find more peace? What does my day look like? Then you realize you're like, okay, the world's intense. Then you look at your own days. My day's intense. It's a reflection of what the world is. So I said, well, what would make my day look less intense? Could I say no to that first person or that thing or that extra meeting or that dinner date? And or if that's going to light me up and fill me full of joy and excitement, say yes to that thing.
Yeah.
So I think there's really just looking at ourselves as the first pillar, that pillar of awareness. What's going on for you? What's going on for me? And allowing yourself to just feel into that, because only then we can start to see more change happen around us.
Your billboard will officially be the change. I'm going to commission this and get it done. Everybody listening, please get Stuart's book, Breathe In, Breathe Out. And Stuart, where can people find out more about you? I know that your handle is the Breathpod on Instagram. But is there anywhere else that you'd like people to direct people to?
Yeah, it's just Breathpod. So there's not the at the beginning.
Sorry.
Yeah, Breathpod on social, Instagram, TikTok, and we do lots of events online. We do some in persons as well that we do mainly in London, but also sometimes up in Scotland and further afield. We've got a few things happening. even over in the States actually later this year. So there's, yeah, the best place to find me is social media, of course. It's kind of a shop window for everybody these days, and our website as well, which is www.breathpod.com.
Yeah.
And within breathpod.com, it kind of show you everything else that we're doing, from the book, the courses that I have, the online content, the in-person events, the stuff that I do with corporates and businesses, the one-to-one stuff that I still do. And yeah, so it's all kind of there, breathpod.com.
Oh, amazing. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you. And yeah, everybody, please do yourselves a favor and check out more of what Stuart has to offer.
Oh, thank you so much.